A penniless widow took refuge in an abandoned shack lost in the desert. However, upon discovering what lay hidden beneath the rocks of the fireplace, her life took an irreversible turn. Tell us in the comments below which city you're listening from. Click the like button and let's begin the story. There was still trail dust on Elena Morales' boots as the first shovelfuls of soil hit the cheap pine coffin. At only 32, the relentless New Mexico sun was determined to remind her that she was now completely alone in life. Her husband Tomas had died 3 days earlier, crushed by an ore cart at the San Cristobal mine. The foreman called it an accident, but Elena was certain it was negligence. Father Ignacio murmured the final prayers in Latin, while Elena stood erect beside the unmarked grave in the Santa Rosa cemetery. There was no extra cash for a headstone, barely enough for the coffin. The other women of the town watched her from a distance, with expressions mixing compassion and relief that they were not the ones widowed that day. That same afternoon, Mr. Hatchins knocked on her door. He wore an immaculate gray suit and flashed a shark-like smile. "Mrs. Morales, I'm sorry for your loss, but business is business. Your late husband owed me $120 in equipment loans. You understand? Here are the papers." Elena examined the documents. The signature appeared to be Tomas's, but he never mentioned any debt. "I don't have that amount, Mr. Hatchins. I understand. So I accept your home as payment. You have 3 days to leave the place." "Madam, that was my house, but it was in your husband's name. Now it belongs to me. Have a good day." Elena tried to talk to Sheriff Donovan, but he barely looked up from his desk. "Mrs. Morales, a duty is a duty. Hatchins has his paperwork in order. I cannot intervene, not even to inquire if those papers are authentic. Are you telling me that you understand the law better than an honorable businessman?" The sheriff let out a laugh. "Go home, woman, and resign yourself to what fate has given you." In her desperation, Elena spent her last $2 on a consultation with the lawyer Morrison. The lawyer examined the documents and shook his head in refusal. "Madam, from a technical standpoint, they are legal. Even if they weren't, a lawsuit would cost you more than you'll ever have. I suggest you find relatives who will take you in. I have no family, Mr. Morrison. In that case, get yourself a new husband without delay." The parishioners offered her compassion, but no real assistance. "It's a horrible situation, dear Elena," they used to say, "but a lady without companionship simply cannot survive. You need to find a man to protect you." As if Tomas had the ability to defend her from anything, as if she were so fragile that she couldn't live without a name to protect her. On the third day, Elena packed her few belongings into a canvas sack, a couple of dresses, a blanket, and her mother's Bible, a kitchen knife, a canteen, and she left before dawn to avoid Hatchins enjoying watching her leave. She headed west, since going east would take her back to Santa Fe, where more Hatchins awaited her. Before her stretched an endless desert, an expanse of reddish sand and sagebrush, under a sky that was overwhelming for a single person. The heat of September struck with the force of a hammer on an anvil. After 2 days of walking, with her canteen almost empty and her feet bloody inside her shoes, Elena spotted something on the horizon. Initially, she thought it was a mirage, one of those illusions that the blazing desert sun causes in tired eyes. However, as she approached, the silhouette became clear. It was a hut of wood and adobe, as lonely as a charred bone. There was no path leading to it, nor were there any fences or corrals visible. Only the building stood, hunched against the ground, its empty openings gazing at the horizon like lifeless eyes. Elena stopped 100 meters away. She had always been taught that a decent woman did not travel alone. They should not take possession of what belonged to others, nor venture into unknown places. Nonetheless, she had also been taught that with effort and good behavior, she would be safe. and there she was. Widowed and dispossessed of a home at 32, the door stood ajar, creaking slightly with the breeze that carried the desert sand. Elena took a deep breath and moved toward an uncertain future. The path to the cabin was almost imperceptible, blurred by years of wind and dust. Elena advanced slowly, watchful for possible rattlesnakes or snake burrows. The evening sun turned every rock into a glowing ember. When she reached the entrance, she stopped. "Is anyone here?" she called out, but only the wind answered, whistling through the cracks in the wood. Cautiously, she pushed the door. Inside floated a smell of old dust and dry wood. It had a main room with a stone fireplace. There was an overturned table and 2 broken chairs against the wall, and a calendar from 1890 from 18 years ago hung on it. The person who had lived in this place had left long ago. Elena entered fully and closed the door behind her. The darkness inside was a blessed relief after the scorching sun. She dropped her backpack and allowed herself a moment of weakness, leaning against the wall as tears finally began to flow. After 2 days of walking through the desert, she had reached an abandoned ruin, but at least that ruin had a roof. Once the crying stopped, she inspected the place more thoroughly. In the back, there was a smaller room that contained the remains of a straw mattress. In a corner, she found a wooden trunk. She opened it, hoping it was empty, but inside found blankets gnawed by mice. There was a faded woman's dress, and wrapped in a greasy cloth, a Winchester rifle, along with a box of cartridges. Elena lifted the weapon with trembling hands. Tomas had taught her to shoot when they went out together, despite her mother's objections, who claimed that young ladies should not touch weapons. Elena was always grateful for those lessons. She inspected the rifle, old but still functional. Outside, behind the cabin, she discovered a well. She lowered the rusty bucket and almost let out a cry of joy when she saw it come up full of crystal clear water. She would not have to die of thirst. She drank until she almost felt sick, filled her canteen, and carried another bucket inside. Cleaning the grime accumulated over years, she found more forgotten treasures: an iron pot, 2 pewter plates, and an empty oil lamp. Hanging from a nail next to the fireplace was a family Bible, its leather cover cracked by the passage of time. She opened it and read the first page. Family Castellanos, Miguel, Carmen, and the children. May God protect us. 1889. What happened to the Castellanos family, and why did they abandon everything? At dusk, Elena swept the dirt floor and set the table. She made a bed with the best blankets. It wasn't much, but it was better than what she had the day before. She allowed herself the luxury of experiencing the first glimmer of what might become hope. The sound of horse hooves dashed any hope. Elena froze upon hearing 2 or perhaps 3 horses approaching from the east. She grabbed the rifle and rushed to the window. 3 riders advanced in the evening, semi-darkness, black silhouettes against the orange sky. She remained still, leaning against the wall, her heart pounding against her ribs. The men slowly surrounded the cabin. One dismounted and headed to the door. "We're sure there's someone inside," he exclaimed with a marked Texan accent. "We saw smoke coming from the chimney, so come out without resistance, and there will be no trouble." Elena remained silent, and her hands sweated on the weapon. "We don't have patience to repeat, friend, so come out or we'll come in after you." "This property is deserted," Elena finally said. "I'm not harming anyone." From outside came silence, followed by laughter. "Guys, it's a woman," the man commented. The laughter grew louder. "Ma'am, this land is the property of Mr. Garrison, and you are illegally occupying private property. There was no fence or sign in sight. It doesn't matter how you're dressed. You have until tomorrow noon to leave. Otherwise, we'll throw you out by force. Understood? Elena raised the rifle and fired a shot into the sky through the open window. The loud blast caused the horses to neigh and back away. Cursing, the men sought shelter. The next shot won't go into the air, Elena shouted, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. Get out of here. There was a moment of tense silence. Then, the leader raised his voice. You're making a mistake, woman. Mr. Garrison does not tolerate intruders. We will return. The horse's hooves galloped away. Elena slid to the floor, still gripping the rifle tightly in her trembling hands. She had fired at armed men and defended a property she didn't even know if she had the right to claim. And surely those men would return with more weapons and less patience. She stayed awake all night. With the rifle in her lap, every sound from the desert made her start. When the sun finally rose, Elena was still alive and still had a roof over her head. In the following days, Elena worked tirelessly. She sealed the cracks in the walls with mud from the well, repaired the broken chairs using ropes from the trunk. She cleaned the chimney and collected dry sage to use as fuel. Each improvement made the cabin feel less like an abandoned tomb and more like a possible home. She trained in the art of hunting. For her first rabbit, she used 6 shots and an hour of clumsy pursuit. The second only required 2 shots for the 5th. Elena realized her good aim when hunger sharpened her concentration. She prepared the meat over the fireplace fire and saved the skins to use them profitably later. The water from the well had a pure taste, and its level never decreased. Elena began to wash her clothes, her body, and the old blankets. At dusk, she cleaned herself behind the cabin, keeping the rifle close and constantly watching the horizon. Although Garrison's men had not returned, she was sure they would come back. While sweeping one afternoon, she noticed that one of the stones on the hearth of the fireplace was slightly protruding. She pressed it, and it moved inward with a soft click. Elena knelt down and felt around the stone. It was loose. She removed the stone completely and discovered a cavity in the wall behind it. Inside it lay a package covered in oilcloth. She extracted it using her hands. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it on the table, a leather diary, a small canvas bag, and several folded documents. She began by opening the diary. The handwriting was feminine and slanted, and in some sections it was illegible because the ink had smudged. Diary of Carmen Castellanos. May the Lord keep these words for whoever needs them. Elena carefully leafed through the pages. Most of it consisted of daily notes about life in the desert, the children, lost crops, and dry wells. However, towards the end, the tone changed. The 15th of March, 1891. In the old mine, Miguel found something that today he refuses to tell me about. However, he's clearly afraid. He insists that we have to leave before Garrison finds out. The 20th of March, 1891. This morning, Garrison's men came to inform Miguel that this territory no longer belongs to us. According to them, Miguel signed documents transferring the rights. Miguel swears under oath that he never signed anything, yet they have papers. How can a wealthy man forge documents and get away with it? The 25th of March, 1891. We'll leave tomorrow at the crack of dawn. Miguel hid his find in a place where Garrison would never think to look, and he says it's under the center of the hearth. Whoever finds this notebook should know that William Garrison is a thief and a murderer. He snatched our lands and killed Miguel's brother when he opposed him. For people like us, there is no justice. The last entry was dated March 26. We are leaving right now. May the Lord absolve us for what we abandon. Elena read the notebook 2 more times, her heart racing, and looked at the fireplace under the central part of the hearth. The hearth was the core, the soul of any home. She unfastened the small canvas bag, and inside glittered 3 gold nuggets, each the size of a walnut. Elena held them to the light, a genuine gold, a modest amount, but enough to change a destiny. She examined the papers, property deeds in the name of Miguel Castellanos, and a fraudulent sales contract bearing his signature. However, the ink was not the same, and the paper turned out to be more recent than the original documents. A letter written by William Garrison himself addressed to a certain J. Morrison, who was a lawyer, in which they debated how to resolve the Castellanos matter. Morrison, precisely the lawyer who had informed Elena that there was nothing to be done, the same one who surely tampered with Tomas's papers for Hutchins's benefit, Elena noticed that all the pieces were starting to fit together. Garrison, Hutchins, and Sheriff Donovan, all connected, all getting rich, while ordinary citizens lost everything. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Elena put everything back in the hiding place and placed the stone again in its spot. If Carmen had stated that the crucial thing was under the heart of the home, then the gold nuggets were nothing but a distraction. The real treasure lay buried right beneath the fireplace. However, before starting to dig, she had to make sure no one interrupted her. She sat by the window, rifle in hand, watching the desert. The landscape turned purple with the sunset somewhere, and out there waited Garrison's men. Somewhere, guys like Hutchins and Morrison rested peacefully on plush mattresses while widows perished in the desert. Elena gripped the rifle tightly. She had evolved from a woman begging for help to one firing warning shots. Perhaps the vulnerability they had instilled in her was nothing but a useful falsehood to keep her submissive. Perhaps she was stronger than she had been led to believe. She waited until the dead of night when the new moon turned the desert into absolute darkness. Elena moved the table, rolled up the blankets, and proceeded to remove the stones from the hearth. Using a kitchen knife in his own hands, he managed to remove the first stones without difficulty. The stones in the center were fixed with an ancient mortar that crumbled just by touching it. He remained silent while working, pausing every so often to hear only the wind and the coyotes. Beneath the stones, he found compacted earth. First he used the knife and then his hands to finish. At 2 feet deep, his fingers felt wood. He carefully unearthed a crate while his heart pounded. It was a military ammunition box, heavy and sealed with wax. Elena dragged it to the table and opened it. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, she found many more documents. She lit the oil lamp she had refilled with melted rabbit fat. Then she began reading property titles from 20 different families, fraudulent sales contracts, and correspondence between Garrison Morrison and various territorial government employees. There was also a detailed list of bribes given to Sheriff Donovan, and furthermore, an accounting ledger showing that Garrison acquired stolen gold from the San Cristobal mine, the same mine where Tomas died. There were more written statements from workers who witnessed how Garrison ordered the accident that caused the death of Miguel Castellanos' brother. It included receipts for payments to hitmen and a list of individuals who had disappeared after confronting Garrison. The name of Tomas Morales appeared at the end with a date that corresponded to 3 days before his death. Elena reviewed each document with trembling hands. Garrison had not only appropriated land, but had also killed, building an empire on bodies and widows. At that moment, Elena possessed the evidence and heard a noise coming from outside. Elena blew out the lamp and grabbed the rifle. From all directions, multiple footsteps and whispering voices were approaching. The boss wants to finish this tonight. Surround the cabin. Elena recognized the voice of the Texan who had already arrived earlier. She hurried to the back window, looked outside, and spotted 4 or perhaps 5 men, an excessive number. The Texan shouted, "Ma'am, Mr. Garrison has arrived. Come out now, or we'll burn the cabin down with you inside." A different, more polite voice was heard. "Don't talk nonsense, Dawson. William Garrison, we're not going to set fire to my own property." Elena had never seen him before, However, she would recognize that arrogance anywhere, Mrs. Intruder. I give you one last chance to leave without violence. This land belongs to the Castellanos, exclaimed Elena. I have the documents that prove it. There was silence, and then Gary smiled. The documents, my dear, say whatever I want them to say. Come out now. I have something else. Mr. Garrison, I have your account book. I have the letters that prove you murdered Miguel Castellanos' brother. I have the list of men you have killed, among them my husband. Silence again. This one felt different, charged with tension. Dawson, bring the dynamite, Garrison said in a low voice. Elena felt the anguish rising in her throat. Along with the evidence, they planned to blow it up. She ran to the fireplace and began putting the documents back into the box. Then she heard another sound, many hooves approaching quickly. It's the marshal, one of Garrison's men shouted. Elena looked through the front window. 6 riders with federal badges were galloping toward the cabin, rifles in hand. At the front was a man with a gray mustache and black hat. William Garrison, the marshal shouted. I have arrest warrants signed by the territorial judge. You and your men drop your weapons. The Texan raised his revolver. The marshal fired a single shot. The Texan collapsed. Instantly, the rest of Garrison's men dropped their weapons. Garrison tried to mount his horse, but 2 marshals pulled him down and forced him to his knees. This is an outrage. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, the marshal said as he dismounted his horse. I've been investigating him for 6 months. I have witnesses ready to testify. Mr. Garrison has committed fraud, murder, and land theft. Slowly, Elena came out of the cabin, the rifle still in her hands. The marshal watched her in amazement. Are you all right, ma'am? I'm fine, Marshal, and I have something that will interest you. She went back inside and came out with the ammunition box. She opened it in front of the marshal. Inside was evidence, documents proving everything Garrison has done. Murders, robberies, corruption. The marshal examined the papers by the light of his lantern. His eyes widened. Good heavens! This is enough to hang him 3 times over. An elderly man stepped away from the group of marshals. His weathered face showed a life of work under the sun. Did you find Miguel's documents? He asked in a hoarse voice. Let me introduce myself. I am Ernesto Castellanos, Miguel's brother. When my family disappeared, I knew Garrison was behind it, but I had no evidence. Now you have them, said Elena. Garrison spat on the ground. You won't prove anything. I have the best lawyers in the region. Had the marshal corrected him, Mr. Morrison was arrested this morning in Santa Fe. When shown the evidence of his forgeries, he sang like a canary. He provided names: Hatchins in Santa Rosa, Sheriff Donovan, and Judge Parker, all arrested. Elena's knees buckled. Hatchins is in prison awaiting trial. And why? He took my house. He said my husband owed him money. The marshal nodded. They are false documents. He will surely file a claim with the new judge when we reach Santa Fe. He looked at Garrison with disdain. Stand him up. A long journey awaits us. While the deputies handcuffed Garrison and his men, the chief deputy approached Elena. Ma'am, we will require those documents as evidence and also your testimony during the trial. Whatever you need, Marshal. What is your name? Elena Morales. Well, Mrs. Morales, you have just accomplished what the territorial government couldn't in a decade. You captured the most dangerous man in New Mexico. He paused for a moment. How did you come to this cabin? Elena looked at the dilapidated building that had served as her refuge. I had nowhere else to go. I found this abandoned place. The Castellanos had left clues, and I simply followed them. Ernesto Castellanos approached with eyes full of tears. My sister-in-law, Carmen, was always shrewd. She knew someone would come, someone who needed it as much as we did. He held Elena's hands. Thank you for making my deceased brother's voice heard. As the deputies took Garrison and his men eastward, Ernesto lagged behind. This land belonged to my family, he affirmed. The documents verify it, but I am old and have no descendants. Senora Morales, if you wish to work, we can reach an agreement. Elena observed the cabin and then turned her gaze toward the vast desert. She arrived at this place expecting to die, yet the desert taught her a lesson that Santa Rosa never could, that she could withstand any storm. We will talk, Mr. Castellanos. But first, I must appear as a witness in a trial. The journey to Santa Fe took 4 days. Elena rode on horseback beside Marshal Hayes, who patiently detailed the progress of the trial. The territory's laws, he explained, were written by men and for men. A woman who testified against an influential man would be met with disbelief. Even with all those papers? Elena inquired. The papers help, but Garrison has allies, magistrates who shared his table, and politicians who accepted his contributions. Hayes spat on the ground. Justice is not impartial, Mrs. Morales. Sometimes it requires having its view forcibly cleared. They arrived in Santa Fe as the sun set on the 4th day. The territory's capital was 10 times larger than Santa Rosa, with 2-story adobe buildings and cobblestone streets. Hayes led her without delay to the territory prosecutor's office. A slender man named Samuel Porter examined the documents Elena had found, raising his eyebrows as he turned each page. This is astonishing. However, Mrs. Morales, I must be honest with you. Garrison will claim these papers are forged, that you planted them to get revenge. What connection did you have with him? I have no connection at all. He ordered my husband's murder. Porter took off his glasses. Do you have evidence of that? His name appears on the list. It requires more than a simple list, ma'am. We need witnesses who saw the order, the weapon, and a chain of evidence that no lawyer can break. Elena felt frustration burning in her chest. So, what good are all those documents? They are very useful, but on their own, they are not enough. Porter leaned forward. We need people to testify. Minors, dispossessed families, anyone Garrison has harmed. Most are afraid. Those who aren't are already dead. Therefore, we must find the brave ones. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena did exactly that. With the help of Ernesto Castellanos and Marshal Hayes, she toured the humble neighborhoods of Santa Fe. She visited worker camps and taverns where men drowned their failures. She found widows like herself, Maria Sanchez, whose husband died in the same mine as Tomas, Josefina Herrera, whose family lost their ranch due to forged documents, Teresa Ochoa, whose brother simply disappeared. After threatening to report Garrison, she found workers willing to talk. A foreman who witnessed the accident that killed Castellanos, and a bank employee who saw Morrison forge signatures. A miner heard Garrison give the order to deal with Tomas Morales' matter. Everyone who agreed to testify was threatened. They received notes on their doors and had their windows broken. A man was beaten in an alley. Marshal Hayes was forced to place guards at the homes of key witnesses, and one night Elena also had her share of intimidation. When returning from visiting the widows, 3 men cornered her on a dark street. Mr. Garrison sends a message, declared the largest one, who had a scar across his face. If you withdraw your statement, you will live. If you testify, you will die. Elena had understood in the desert that feeling fear was natural. That courage is not about not being afraid, but about acting, even when you are. Although her hands were trembling, her voice sounded steady. Tell Mr. Garrison that we will meet in court. The scarred man took a step forward, and Elena drew the knife she had carried in her belt ever since. She raised it in the air. Also, Tell him that I am no longer that fearful woman who arrived in the desert. If anyone touches me, I will scream. And besides, there is a federal marshal at the corner hotel who will come immediately. The men exchanged glances, and the risk wasn't worth it, so they left cursing. However, not everyone had the same luck. The foreman who planned to testify was found dead in the river. Marshal Hayes stated that it was an accidental drowning. Elena knew the truth. The bank worker fled to Mexico. Terrified, two of the widows decided to back down. Elena was on the verge of giving up and taking the first horse back to the desert, but at that moment, Teresa Ochoa knocked on the door of her hotel. With eyes red from crying, Teresa declared, "My brother was a good person. He was an honest worker who adored his family." Garrison finished him off with the same ease as one squashes a mosquito. "If I don't speak for my brother, then who will?" Elena held Teresa's hands and said, "We'll meet and talk the eve of the trial." Prosecutor Porter summoned everyone: Elena, the three widows who did not yield, and the intrepid miner Ernesto Castellanos. "Tomorrow," he commented, "they would face the most expensive lawyer that money could hire. They will try to make you believe you are foolish, deceitful, and spiteful, but you endure, tell the truth, and let the jury perceive your integrity." That night, Elena was unable to fall asleep. She sat by the window of her hotel room, gazing at the starry sky over Santa Fe. She remembered Tomas and his unwavering faith that the system would ultimately protect them. She recalled Carmen Castellanos, hiding evidence for a future she would never live to see. She reflected on all those women who died in silence, since no one was going to heed their words anyway. Nevertheless, she also thought about the cabin in the desert, how she arrived there hoping to die, and instead learned to live, and how the rifle that once trembled in her hands now seemed an extension of her own determination. The system was designed so that women like her would be defeated, but by refusing to accept that defeat, she might change the rules for the benefit of all who came after. When dawn broke, Elena put on her only presentable black dress, braided her hair, and headed to the courthouse. The courtroom was packed with people. Garrison had brought spectators, people who owed him favors, faces Elena recognized as acquaintances from Santa Rosa. There were also the reporters, at least 5, with their notepads out. Marshal Hayes told him that the case had caught the interest of newspapers as far away as Denver and San Francisco. The magistrate, named Theodore Blackwell, had just arrived from Washington with the purpose of eradicating corruption in the territory. He had no debt to Garrison. That was his only advantage. Samuel Porter presented the case with surgical precision. He exhibited the altered deeds, recited extracts from the epistles, and detailed the scheme of 2 decades of methodical theft. Ernesto Castellanos was the first witness called. The old man, with a tremulous but clear voice, recounted how his brother Miguel had found a rich vein of silver on his land, how Garrison suddenly showed up with documents claiming the land belonged to him, how after protesting, Ernesto's other brother turned up dead. Whitmore, Garrison's elegant lawyer, tore Ernesto apart during cross-examination. "Did you witness with your own eyes Mr. Garrison murdering your brother?" "No. In that case, you are only assuming. Does your family have a financial debt to Mr. Garrison? Is this not merely the retaliation of a bitter debtor?" Ernesto left the stand trembling, and Elena clenched her fists tightly. Then they called the miner, a young man named Carlos Ruiz. He recounted that he had heard Garrison tell the foreman, "Handle the Morales matter. I don't care how." 3 days later, Tomas Morales lay dead. Whitmore attacked him. "What exactly do you mean by fix the problem? It could be an instruction to fire him or to transfer him. You are assuming a murder without conclusive evidence. True, he was fired from the San Cristobal mine, but there is no reason for him to hold a grudge against his former boss." Carlos withdrew with a pale face, while Porter looked uneasy. Next, they called Elena. She walked to the stand with trembling legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and promised to tell the truth. Porter asked her to give her testimony. Elena began with Tomas's funeral, then mentioned how Hutchins took her house, her escape to the desert, and upon finding the cabin, what did she come across? I found Carmen Castellanos' diary, the authentic deeds, Mr. Garrison's account book, and the correspondence between him and lawyer Morrison. And where are those documents now? Right here, in this courtroom. Porter entered them as evidence. Then it was Whitmore's turn. He approached Elena with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Mrs. Morales, you are a widow of limited means and desperate. It's not true that you are capable of making up any story to seize lands that don't belong to you. I didn't fabricate anything. The documents speak for themselves. The documents, which you yourself fabricated to support a story that favors you. Whitmore addressed the jury. This lady admits to having entered a private property without permission and also admits to lacking legal training. And now she expects us to believe that she accidentally found evidence that the territorial government pursued fruitlessly for years. The evidence was hidden, Elena asserted. Carmen Castellanos hid it to keep it safe, or you forged it to avenge your husband's death, a death that unfortunately was a workplace accident. Whitmore watched her with feigned compassion. Mrs. Morales, I understand your suffering, but it does not justify falsely accusing a respectable man. Elena felt anger rising in her throat. My husband didn't lose his life in an accident. He was killed because he planned to report the theft of gold from the mine. Do you have evidence of that? There are witnesses who saw it. The witness drowned in the river a week ago. How convenient. Whitmore smiled. Mrs. Morales, it is not true that you are a bitter woman who blames others for your sorrows and who claims money you did not earn. Honestly. Porter exclaimed, objection. Whitmore said, still smiling, withdrawn. Elena stepped down from the witness stand, feeling hurt. Whitmore had portrayed her as desperate, vindictive, and probably dishonest. He directed his gaze to the jury. Some showed skepticism. Teresa Ochoa testified about her missing brother. Whitmore made her sob, suggesting that the brother, he possibly ran away because of debts. Maria Sanchez testified about her husband, who died in the mine. Whitmore indicated that the mines posed a danger and that accidents usually happened at the end of the second day. Elena had the feeling they were losing the game. Garrison appeared confident, whispering with his lawyers and occasionally flashing smiles. That night, Porter summoned those who were going to testify. I'll speak to you honestly. Whitmore is competent, very competent, but we possess something he lacks. What? Teresa inquired. The truth, along with an unexpected witness. The next morning, Porter brought in a stranger to Elena, a well-dressed young man with a restless appearance. I have recorded his name in the file. James Morrison Jr., son of lawyer Morrison. The public broke into whispers. Magistrate Blackwell banged his gavel. Mr. Morrison, what knowledge do you have of your father's actions? Everything. I collaborated with him. I forged signatures, altered dates in documents, and so I did for 3 years. The boy's eyes filled with tears. I thought it was just a business matter, but upon seeing that dead foreman in the river, I could no longer remain silent. Morrison Jr. explained in detail the mechanism of Garrison's operation, how they located valuable land, forged fictitious obligations, and corrupted authorities, and how, if someone refused to cooperate, they resolved the matter. Who was in charge of resolving those conflicts? Porter asked. A man nicknamed Dawson, the same one Marshall Chase shot while protecting Mrs. Morales. Whitmore tried to discredit young Morrison, but the damage was already irreparable. The boy had brought with him more of his father's files, accounting records that matched perfectly with the papers found by Elena. Judge Blackwell examined the two sets of documents. Mr. Whitmore, could you offer any explanation for this coincidence? Whitmore was left speechless. The closing arguments turned out to be very concise. Porter demanded justice for decades of victims, while Whitmore asked for leniency for a businessman who he said was wrongly accused by resentful rivals. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned and the foreperson read the verdict. For the crime of first-degree murder, guilty. For fraud, guilty. And for land usurpation, guilty. Garrison collapsed in his seat while Elena, with her eyes closed, allowed herself to cry. Judge Blackwell sentenced Garrison to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He ordered that all stolen property be returned to its original owners or their heirs. He arranged for Garrison's assets to be liquidated to compensate the victims. Before concluding the hearing, Blackwell called Elena forward. Doña Elena, your courage has brought justice where the system failed. This court recognizes your legitimate claim to the Castellanos property. With the approval of Mr. Ernesto Castellanos, let it be recorded in the record. Outside the courthouse, a group of reporters surrounded Elena. How do you feel right now? What are your plans for the future? What message would you give to other widows? Elena looked at each of them. Justice doesn't come by itself. You have to fight for it and never let anyone tell you that you are too small to make a difference. 3 months later, Elena returned to the desert. This time, she was not walking to escape. She rode a mare acquired with the compensation funds ordered by the judge. She carried supplies, utensils, and something of greater value. Hope. The hut stood, just as in her memory, solitary against the endless horizon. But now she no longer saw it as a refuge of despair, but as a home won through effort and honesty. Before dying peacefully in his sleep, Ernesto Castellanos had put the property titles in her name. This land needs someone who loves it, he had told her. Carmen would be proud that it was you. During the first weeks, Elena devoted herself to making repairs. She replaced the rotten wood, waterproofed the roof, built a corral for the mare, and cleared the well until the water emerged clear. She went beyond the hut and found what Miguel Castellanos had already discovered, a vein of silver stretching along the northern slope. It was not an enormously abundant vein, but it was enough. Enough to live with dignity, enough to build something of her own. She hired workers from Santa Fe, men who had lost their jobs after the closure of the Garrison mines. She paid them fair wages and offered them safe working conditions. The small mine operated modestly but steadily. The desert that had once seemed so aggressive now revealed its mysteries. Elena discovered the places where edible plants sprouted, where rabbits made their nests, and which streams flowed with the spring rains. She became just another element of the landscape, like the sage and the rocks. However, she did not live in solitude by choice. The widows who had testified alongside her began to visit her. Maria Sanchez, who had recovered her husband's ranch. Teresa Ochoa, who used her compensation to establish a business in Santa Fe. Josefina Herrera, who at that time taught reading to underprivileged children. It would be good to undertake something additional, Teresa commented one afternoon as they drank tea in the restored house. We managed to win the case. However, there are still thousands of widows who lack protection. Thus, the New Mexico Widows Association was born. Elena allocated a portion of her compensation to create a legal fund to support low-income women in defending their rights. They acquired a modest building in Santa Fe, which provided widows with free legal consultation, job training, and a sense of belonging. Impressed by the work, Marshall Hayes helped pressure the territorial government to enact new laws. From then on, widows had the right to automatically inherit property, contracts required neutral witnesses, and debt documents required judicial approval. You transform the system, Hayes commented to Elena during one of his visits, not entirely, but enough to make it difficult for another garrison to succeed. Elena also underwent a personal transformation. The woman who had arrived in the desert in a borrowed dress with delicate hands now wore work pants. Her hands developed calluses from using a pick and shovel, and she could shoot a rifle with deadly accuracy when the situation required it. The first streaks of silver appeared in her hair, and her face showed new wrinkles etched by the sun and experience. However, the essential thing was that when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the widow of Tomas Morales. She saw Elena, only Elena, a woman who had lost everything and had built something greater from the ashes. The workers held her in high esteem, and the merchants considered her their equal. When she traveled to Santa Rosa on business, she would run into Hutchins, now free after 2 years of a fraud sentence, but ruined and humiliated. He would cross the street to avoid meeting her. One spring afternoon, during Elena's inspection of the mine, one of the employees discovered an object. It was a small chest buried in a crevice, possibly hidden by Miguel Castellanos several decades earlier. Inside, there were more silver nuggets and a message: "May whoever finds this with an honest heart use it to build, not to destroy. MC." Elena smiled. Miguel had understood that the true treasure was not the metal, but what was done with it. He invested that silver in founding a school in the nearest village. 10 miles east, the first school in the area that equally admitted Mexican, indigenous, and white children. The teacher he hired was a young idealist with the same drive that had led Elena to testify against Garrison. "I want the children to learn that the world is capable of changing," affirmed the teacher. "That one person can make a difference." Not one person, corrected Elena, but many people acting together with courage. 5 years after the trial, Elena was on the porch of her cabin, now expanded with 2 extra rooms and a study. Watching dust on the horizon, a carriage approached strangely. Few visitors came so far. The carriage stopped, and a formally dressed man descended, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Elena Morales?" "The same. I am the territorial governor." He extended his hand. "I have come from Santa Fe exclusively to meet you." Elena invited him in. The governor admired the cabin, the well, the view of the desert. "Your story inspired legislative changes in 3 territories," he commented. "Laws that protect widows, require clarity in real estate transactions, and punish corruption of officials. I'm glad. I want to offer you a position as a government advisor on legal reform issues. A generous salary and an office in the capital." Elena looked through the window at the desert that had rescued her. "Thank you, Governor, but my work is here, with the mine, with the school, with the women who need to know that it is possible to survive." The governor nodded. "I understand, but if you ever change your mind..." After his departure, Elena settled on the porch, watched the sunset dye the sky orange and purple, and thought of Tomas. He never would have imagined that she would become a landowner, employer of men, and a driving force for social transformation. She remembered Carmen Castellanos hiding evidence with the desperate hope that someone would find her, someone who needed her as much as she needed to be heard. She also thought of all the future Helenas, women who would reach the limit of their endurance and discover, against all odds, that the end was truly a beginning. Life had shown her that fragility was a fallacy created to keep women in a confined space. That justice is not received as a gift, but earned as a conquest. That suffering could become a purpose if one possessed the necessary courage to face it rather than escape. As the stars began to shine in the desert firmament, Elena experienced a sensation she hadn't known in years. Peace, but not the peace of conformity, but the peace of one who has fought and triumphed. The peace of one who has built her life step by step and is aware that no one can take it from her. The desert, which once represented her last hope, had become her home. And she, who had come in search of a place to die, had instead found a reason to keep living. A decade after the trial, Elena celebrated her 45th birthday surrounded by loved ones. The initial cabin had become the nucleus of a small cluster of buildings. The main house had been expanded with a dormitory for employees, stables, the mine office, and the Widows' Society building. The mine generated a modest but steady production. Elena had understood that she didn't need to be wealthy, just to feel secure. The 15 employees who worked for her received fair wages and shared in the profits. Of these, 3 were women unusual in the mining industry, but completely reasonable for Elena. If she managed to learn how to handle dynamite, then anyone could do it. The school she established already had 50 students and 2 teachers. The children studied math, reading, and history, and an even more crucial lesson that their background did not define their destiny. That a Mexican girl could be as competent as any wealthy white boy from Santa Fe. Over 200 women had received assistance from the Widows' Society to recover property, start businesses, or simply find the strength to move forward. Maria Sanchez was in charge of the main office in Santa Fe. Teresa Ochoa traveled the territory giving lectures on women's rights. Josefina Herrera was elected to the city council, becoming the first woman to hold that position in New Mexico. The transformation was gradual, sometimes agonizingly slow. There were still dishonest judges and men who believed women did not deserve a voice. But the cracks in that system were widening, and each one represented a triumph. Elena had become a well-known figure. When she went to Santa Fe, people greeted her with respect. She heard strangers whisper, "That's Elena Morales, the one who took down Garrison." Journalists sometimes asked for interviews. Activists invited her to speak at their events, but Elena preferred the desert. There, far from crowds and attention, she could simply be herself. She tended her chili plants, rode at dawn, sat by the well where she once thought she would die of thirst, and thanked every breath. She had not remarried. Some said it was a pity, but Elena considered it a liberation. She had loved Tomas, but also discovered that she didn't need a man to define who she was. She had hardworking friends who respected her, a community she helped build. She had a purpose, and that was enough. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. A young reporter from a San Francisco newspaper wanted to write an article about the widow who transformed the West. Elena received him, offering tea and showing skepticism. "I didn't make any changes for myself. However, you started something." Her story motivated other women. Thanks to her case, the laws were changed. The laws changed because many people fought. I simply found myself in the right place at the right time. Or perhaps you made it the right time. The journalist pulled out his notebook. "Tell me about that first night in the shack when you were alone in the desert." Elena looked through the window at the land she now commanded perfectly. She felt panic. She thought she was going to die. Yet she had come so far that going back seemed more terrifying than continuing. "At what moment did you know you would survive?" Elena reflected. "The moment I fired that rifle, when those men tried to intimidate me, and I decided it was better to die standing than to live on my knees. A change happened inside me. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me." The reporter was writing furiously. What would you tell the women who find themselves in the situation you were in, desperate and without options? That possibilities exist even when you don't see them. That society will tell you that you are fragile, incompetent, that you need someone to rescue you. Don't believe it. You have more strength than you think. If the system is designed for you to fail, then change it. It seems revolutionary, but wanting justice is not. It's something human. 2 months later, the article appeared in newspapers from California to New York. The Widow of the Desert, the story of a woman who brought down a corrupt empire. More visitors and more questions arrived. Requests for assistance grew. Elena personally answered every letter addressed to the distressed widows. To women with legal matters, she sent information about the association and put them in touch with trusted lawyers. To the girls who asked about how to be brave, she replied, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it." One spring morning, while Elena was inspecting arrangements at the mine, a young worker approached timidly. "Doña Elena, my sister lost her husband last month. She is alone and with 3 children. The owner claims that the house belonged to the husband and that now she must leave it." Elena felt the old anger so familiar in her family. After so many years and so many changes, that was still happening. "Where does your sister live?" "She lives in El Paso. Tell her to go. The association now has lawyers in Texas. We will not allow them to evict her." And so it happened. They did not. 6 months later, the worker's sister recovered her home. The most important thing is that she joined the El Paso branch of the association and assisted 3 other widows in similar circumstances. In this way, the impact expanded. One rescued woman helped others. Confronting an injustice gave many women the strength to fight against their own. Upon turning 50, Elena settled on the cabin porch at sunset. The original structure still stood, deliberately preserved as a memory. However, around it, life had developed. Gardens, carefully tended young trees, and the murmur of conversations in the communal dining room. She remembered the Elena from 2 decades ago, that woman full of fear who had arrived hoping to die. If she had the chance to speak to that Elena, what words would she use? That you will get through this. The suffering you are experiencing now will become inner strength. You will lose everything material and find that you still possess what is essential, your very self. The system was made to destroy you, but you were not made to be broken. The solitude of the desert will show you that you were never truly alone, only separated from people who did not deserve your devotion. The sun was descending behind the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Elena half closed her eyes and felt the warm breeze caressing her face. That current of air she once considered harsh now enveloped her like a warm embrace. She had suffered the loss of a husband, a home, and an entire aspect of her identity. Nevertheless, rising from the ruins, she found something no one could ever take from her. The absolute conviction that she had the ability to overcome any adversity, the firm certainty that her existence had a purpose beyond being a man's partner or widow. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky. Now Elena knew them all. She had learned to move among them during the moonless nights, and the desert had revealed its secrets to her. It had shown her that what appears empty is actually teeming with life, if one knows where to look. A student from the school, a 12-year-old girl named Rosa, approached timidly. "Señora Elena, my mother asks if she can visit you tomorrow, as she wishes to ask for some advice. Tell her to come whenever she pleases, for there is always coffee and advice here free of charge." Rosa smiled and ran back, while Elena watched her go. That girl would grow up in a world somewhat different from the one Elena had known. It was not perfect, it was still unfair in many ways, but it had more cracks in the walls and more opportunities, and perhaps one day future generations would look back. They would be amazed that women had to fight so intensely for such fundamental rights as justice, property, and voice. Perhaps they would believe it had always been that way. Nevertheless, Elena would remember, and as long as she kept that memory, she would tell the story. That of Carmen Castellanos, who hid evidence with a desperate hope. That of Tomas Morales, who died before he could witness justice. That of all the widows who, though frightened, testified just the same. And that of the cabin in the desert that served as a refuge for the desperate. For the story that is not told fades away, and this story deserved to be remembered. Elena Morales had arrived in the desert in search of a place to die, but instead, she found a place to live. And in doing so, by refusing to accept the defeat that the system had in store for her, she not only rescued herself, but also changed the rules for all who would come after. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice in the Old West moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what you think of this widow's courage, and don't miss the next inspiring stories. She defied an unjust system. God bless all women who fight for their dignity and their future.